Hello, this is The Hidden History of Business. I'm Frank Hutchison.
And I'm Emily Geddes.
We're going to talk today about beer in Israel, ancient Israel.
Now, if you've read Bible at all, you know that wine plays a pretty significant role in many stories. Jesus' first miracle reported was turning water into wine at the wedding at Cana. Not sure how to pronounce that. And wine seems to be fairly popular. But that's not the only beverage that was.
No. But the one thing about wine is that it was so important that the Hebrews had as many words for wine as Eskimos have for snow. Now, if you speak English like we do, you have one word for snow. It's just snow. Eskimos have lots of words for snow to describe the different types of snow. In Hebrew, if you go back in the ancient texts, you see that they use different words for wine based upon when it was made, how old it was, and other characteristics. But when you're translating, everything turns into wine.
Now, one thing we've talked in earlier episodes about how cultures used what they had to make wine, to make beer. So in the Mediterranean climate, in that region, grapes are grown fairly easily.
In fact, the 12 spies that are sent out by Moses to investigate the land of Canaan, they come back with this pole bearing a huge bunch of grapes on it because they were so plentiful and they were so big.
So wine was obviously very popular, very common in the area, in large part because of all of the grapes.
That's right.
The plenteous grapes that they had to make this wine out of. However, they also made alcoholic beverages, beer, out of barley, which was the main staple grain in the area at the time.
And of course, we know that beer was made in the Middle East about 6,000 to 7,000 BC. So it was well known throughout the entire region. But consider that they had spent 400 years in Egypt. So guess where they learned beer making? From the Egyptians. And there's archaeological evidence showing that they used the Egyptians' methods of brewing beer.
We found an article that talks about this really fantastic archaeological discovery. Now, they knew that there was some cultural exchange, some cross-pollination, if you will, between ancient Israel and ancient Egypt, but they have this great archaeological evidence now that was just found, I believe, earlier this year. The article is from March of 2015, that talks about a settlement that they found in Tel Aviv, which is pretty far north in Israel. It's further north than any other Egyptian settlement that they found before, that has evidence of a brewery, an Egyptian brewery in Tel Aviv.
Mm-hmm. And now we don't know from the evidence whether it was Egyptians who'd come up and were making, or they were using the Egyptian method. But we do know that there was a lot of exchange between Egypt and Israel.
As well as other ancient cultures in the area.
Very much so. And so you have people who are using these techniques, even when they are not as common. But again, there's reasons for it. That's because there are some people who would prefer beer to wine, although they think they generally consumed about 1 liter of wine per day.
Mm-hmm. Now, in Egypt, wine was more of a high-class drink, in large part because Egypt isn't an area, a region where grapes can grow easily. So any grapes or any wine would have to be imported from further away at a higher cost than the beer, the barley beer that could be made right there at home. Beer was still a very common drink. Everyone in Egypt, archaeologists believe, drank this beer, regardless of their class, their gender, or their age. But wine would have been reserved for those who could afford a slightly more expensive drink.
But we do have evidence that workers on the pyramids, for example, their diet consisted of bread, 5 loaves of bread, and about 2 gallons of beer every day. But in Israel, what you have is this culture that, one, they're sort of in the middle of everybody. So they have a lot of travel through the region. They have made alliances with Egypt over and over again. The Syrians are also coming through, and eventually you'll also have the Romans and the Greeks were coming through there as well. Then you had all the local tribes that were also in that area. They all had their particular drinks that they were consuming, and beer was a big part of it.
I'm going to do one quick correction here, at least in this article.
Yes.
It says, previous excavations in the Delta region of Egypt have shown that ancient Egyptians were producing beer as early as the mid-4th millennium BCE.
Yes, but in the Middle East, there are some indications it was as early as 6,000 to 7,000 BC. In Samaria, Mesopotamia, that area.
Okay. Well, and then that's kind of the messiness of this history. The being started in different areas independently of each other, and then these cultures exchanged their different methods, their different sources, their different ingredients. So it's hard to have a very strict linear structure to the history.
It really is. And if you also think about it, if you go on a trip, a vacation, let's say that you go to Mexico or someplace, and you go to a restaurant and you have a great dish, what do you do when you come home? You tell your friends or your neighbors about this wonderful dish you had, and then what do people do? They try to come up with something like it. And that's exactly what you're having here. You had people, visiting Mesopotamia and drinking beer, and they'd come back and saying, they had this beer in Mesopotamia that was really good. It kind of tasted like, apples and, cinnamon grapes or whatever. And someone else saying, oh, well, gee whiz, I make beer. Maybe I could try throwing apples into mine or whatever. And so you have the constant variation, because what people are trying to do is find the perfect formula that everyone would love.
Well, and the reason they were doing that, it was business. Whoever had the next new best thing would increase their sales and do a little bit better. And
they would.
Yep.
Reminds me of the story of spaghetti sauce. Prego was a second-rate spaghetti sauce, and they hired this market consultant to tell them what would be the perfect spaghetti sauce. He had all these different types of spaghetti sauce made up, and then he had taste tests all over the country, the United States. And when he came back, he said, there's no one perfect spaghetti sauce. There's lots of perfect spaghetti sauce. Some people like it with garlic. Some people like it lumpy. Some people like it smooth. And that is why Prego today is number one. Because they didn't try to make one, they made lots of spaghetti sauces.
Well, in every culture that we've looked at so far, there's been a variation in the beer that's provided. Sometimes it's made with the sap of certain trees. Sometimes it's made with fruit or fruit juice. Sometimes it's made with grain. It's just a wide variety.
There is. And part of it is what's available to them. There's also cultural taste. Like, for example, in Germany, people like their beer light and sweet. In England, they liked it kind of bitter and dark. So they like ale, and Germans like beer. Because it's also what people are used to. It's like the story I heard many years ago. I can't even tell you if it's true or not, but it was about the gauchos in Argentina. They wanted to have fish on Fridays because they were going to be good Catholics. But there were no fish available where they lived because they were raising cattle. So someone arranged to have fish shipped in by rail, and everybody was happy. The gauchos got to eat fish. The railroads were making money. And this went on for many years. And then finally the railroad said, hey, we got this new invention we're going to introduce. And it was refrigerator cars. And so they shipped the fish in on the refrigerator cars. And the gauchos refused to eat the fish because it didn't taste right. Because they had been eating rotten fish all these years. And that's what they thought fish was supposed to taste like. So fresh fish didn't taste right.
So it all comes down to personal preference, I guess.
That's right.
If you liked this episode, consider leaving us a review on iTunes, Stitcher, or social media. You can find snark, updates, and behind-the-scene peeks of production on Twitter. Our handle is @HiddenBiz. That's @HiddenBiz. You can also find us on Facebook as The Hidden History of Business. Music for this podcast is from the album Time Within Itself by Michael Waldrop and used with permission of the artist. You can find out more about it on iTunes and Amazon. If you'd like to access show notes and multimedia content and the periodic rant from your hosts, be sure to visit our website at www.hiddenhistoryofbusiness.com.